Every rule you follow was designed to keep someone else in power. Every trade agreement you depend on expires on a schedule you never voted for. And in 2026, the biggest reset clause in modern economic history comes due. This is not theory. This is the calendar. The United States-Mexico-Canada agreement gets reviewed in July. $2 trillion in annual trade hangs on a 6-year timer that was deliberately built into the deal. The world's 3 largest trading partners will sit down to decide if the system continues or if it ends. You are standing at the exact moment when the scaffolding gets removed and everyone pretends it was always supposed to collapse. You think trade agreements are permanent. They are not. You think borders protect jobs. They redirect profits. You think your grocery bill reflects supply and demand. It reflects who controls the commodity chain and when they choose to reset the terms. The USMCA was sold as stability, but buried in Article 34.7 is a suicide switch. If any one of the 3 countries refuses to confirm renewal, a 10-year countdown begins. By 2036, the agreement dies unless all 3 sign again. This is not a negotiation. This is a hostage situation with a timer. The pattern is older than you think. Power does not transfer smoothly. It resets at intervals designed to look like accidents. These intervals are not random. They follow a script refined over centuries. You are living inside the modern version of a control system that has been dressed up as progress, but operates like a ratchet. Every 6 years, the mechanism clicks. Every 16 years, the stakes go up, and every time the clock runs out, the terms get worse for whoever has the least leverage. Let me show you where this comes from. The British Empire did not collapse by accident. It had expiration dates built into its trade agreements. The system of imperial preference that dominated global commerce from 1832 to 1948 operated on periodic renewals. Every decade, the dominions would renegotiate terms. Every negotiation extracted more from the colonies and gave less protection in return. The colonized economies were not conquered once. They were reconquered in 10-year cycles. Each reset tightened the dependency. By the time India gained independence, its entire industrial base had been deliberately structured around British supply chains. Freedom meant starting from scratch while still owing debts denominated in pounds. The colony was politically free but economically locked. This brings us to stage 1. Establish the dependency. Make the target believe they benefit. The British did it with rail lines and textile mills. The modern version does it with just-in-time supply chains and tariff-free zones. Mexico became the 2nd largest trading partner to the United States, not because of geography. Because NAFTA in 1994 made it cheaper to close a Michigan factory and reopen it in Monterrey. Entire cities were depopulated. Jobs did not move south. Leverage did. The supply chain is not about efficiency. It is about making sure no single country can afford to walk away. Then comes stage 2. Lock the commitment with a renewal clause. NAFTA had no expiration. That was the problem. Trump used that permanence as a weapon during renegotiation. He threatened to blow up the whole system unless Mexico and Canada agreed to the review clause. So they signed the USMCA in 2018 with the timer built in. On the surface, it looked like an update. In practice, it turned a permanent agreement into a subscription service. Now, every 6 years, all 3 countries have to reconfirm or the countdown starts. This is not a safeguard. It is a control mechanism. The country with the least to lose has the most leverage. Stage 3 is where the system turns. Inflation makes the terms unbearable, but exit becomes impossible. Look at what happened between 2020 and 2025. The USMCA took effect on July 1st, 2020. 18 months later, inflation spiked. Shipping costs quadrupled. Tariffs that were supposed to be zero suddenly did not matter because the supply chain itself was breaking. But here is the trick. The inflation was not random. Fiscal stimulus flooded the North American economy while the Federal Reserve kept rates at zero. That money created artificial demand. It also locked Mexico and Canada deeper into dollar dependency. Their exports are priced in dollars, their reserves are held in dollars. When inflation hits, they eat the cost while the US controls the printing press. The renewal clause means they cannot renegotiate until 2026. By then, the damage is permanent. The Bretton Woods system followed this exact pattern. Established in 1944, It locked every major economy into fixed exchange rates pegged to the dollar. The US promised to convert dollars into gold at $35 per ounce. That promise was the anchor, but the system had no exit clause. By 1971, the US had printed so many dollars to fund the Vietnam War that the gold standard became fiction. Nixon closed the gold window in August. No negotiation, no vote, no renewal. He just reset the terms unilaterally. Every country that had trusted the Bretton Woods framework woke up holding devalued paper. The dependency they built over 27 years became a trap the moment the rules changed. The US did not collapse. Everyone else absorbed the shock. Stage 4 introduces the ratchet effect. Every reset reduces options. The countries that were burned by Bretton Woods tried to build alternatives. The European monetary system launched in 1979 to reduce dependency on the dollar. It lasted 20 years before becoming the euro. But the euro required giving up monetary sovereignty. Countries that joined could no longer print their own currency. They traded dollar dependency for Frankfurt dependency. Greece found out what that meant in 2010 when the debt crisis hit. They could not devalue their way out. They could not print their way out. They had to accept austerity terms written by Germany. The reset clause was implicit. Every bailout came with conditions. Every condition reduced sovereignty. The pattern held. China watched all of this and built the Belt and Road Initiative as the counter move. Starting in 2013, Beijing began lending to developing countries for infrastructure projects, ports in Sri Lanka, rail lines in Kenya, highways in Pakistan. The terms looked generous. Low interest loans, long repayment periods, but buried in every contract was a clause. If the country defaulted, China could seize the asset. Sri Lanka handed over Hambantota port in 2017 on a 99-year lease after missing payments. The port was not collateral, it was the target. China did not want the money back, it wanted the infrastructure. This is stage 4 operating in real time. Offer terms that look better than the old system. Wait for the crisis, then reset the ownership when the borrower cannot pay. Now comes stage 5, the illusion of choice. Every country believes it can play both sides. Mexico wants access to US markets but also wants Chinese investment. Canada wants to maintain USMCA but also wants to trade with Asia. The European Union wants energy independence but relies on liquefied natural gas from the United States and Qatar. Everyone thinks they can hedge, but the reset clauses make hedging impossible. The USMCA review in 2026 will force Mexico and Canada to choose. If they allow more Chinese manufacturing to use Mexico as a backdoor into the US market, the agreement dies. If they block Chinese investment, they lose the capital they need to compete. There is no middle path. The system is binary by design. You are either inside the block or you are outside. And once you are outside, getting back in means accepting worse terms. This is the exact pattern that destroyed the Hanseatic League. From the 13th century to the 17th century, the League controlled trade across Northern Europe. It was not a country, it was a network of merchant cities that set the rules for who could buy and sell what. Membership meant access. But every 10 years, the League held a diet where terms were renegotiated. Cities that wanted in had to accept tariffs on their own goods, while giving the League merchants tariff-free access. It worked for 300 years. Then it stopped, because Sweden and Denmark and Poland all built their own fleets. They bypassed the League entirely. By 1669, the League was a ghost. It did not collapse from external invasion. It collapsed because the reset mechanism gave every member a recurring chance to defect, and eventually enough of them did. The United States is now playing the role of the Hanseatic League. It controls the reserve currency. It controls the payment rails. It controls access to the largest consumer market in the world. But it is using the USMCA review as a forcing function. Every 6 years, Canada and Mexico have to recommit. Every 6 years, the terms can be changed. And every time they recommit, they lose a little more room to maneuver. Trump said it explicitly in 2024. He will use the review to extract concessions on immigration, on energy policy, on how Mexico handles Chinese transshipment. None of that was in the original agreement, but the review clause makes all of it negotiable. The framework is not protection, it is a lever. Let me show you where you are on this map. You have already passed stage 1. Your job depends on a supply chain that crosses at least 2 borders. You have already passed stage 2. The renewal clause is live. You have already passed stage 3. Inflation made the terms unbearable, but walking away would cost more. You are now inside stage 4. The ratchet is tightening. Every 6 months brings another headline about nearshoring or friendshoring or reshoring. Every headline means someone is calculating where to move the factories next. And every move consolidates control with whoever writes the new terms. Stage 6 is the compliance test. This is where the system checks if you have internalized the logic. You start defending it. You start saying things like the agreement needs to be updated, or we need to protect critical supply chains, or we cannot let China dominate rare earth minerals. All of those statements are true. All of them push you further into the dependency. Because the only way to protect the supply chain is to accept the terms of whoever controls it. And the only people who control it are the ones who designed the reset clause in the first place. Here is how the math works. The United States runs a trade deficit with Mexico of over $130 billion annually. That sounds like Mexico is winning. It is not. Because that deficit represents goods made by US-owned companies in Mexican factories using components imported from the US and then sold back to US consumers. The value added in Mexico is labor. Everything else is controlled upstream and downstream. The deficit is not a leak, it is a feature. It keeps Mexican wages low and US profit margins high. But the USMCA review gives the US the option to change the rules if Mexico stops playing along. The deficit exists because the agreement allows it. The moment the agreement changes, the deficit can be wiped out with a tariff. This is not trade policy. It is a protection racket with spreadsheets. The same logic applies to Canada. Canada sends 80% of its exports to the United States. The US sends 18% of its exports to Canada. Asymmetry is leverage. If the USMCA dies, Canada loses access to its primary market. The US loses access to oil and aluminum and a few niche products. The pain is not distributed equally. So when the review happens in July 2026, Canada will accept terms it would never accept under normal negotiation. Because refusing means economic suicide. The agreement was never about fairness. It was about creating a relationship so lopsided that exit is unthinkable. This is the same mechanism the International Monetary Fund has used since 1944. A country hits a debt crisis. The IMF offers a loan. The loan comes with conditions. Privatize state assets. Cut social spending. Open the economy to foreign investment. The country agrees because the alternative is default. 10 years later, the debt is bigger and the economy is more dependent. The IMF comes back with another loan and more conditions. The cycle repeats until sovereignty is theoretical. Greece went through 7 bailout rounds between 2010 and 2018. Each round came with stricter terms. By the end, the European Central Bank was setting Greek tax policy. The IMF did not save Greece. It acquired Greece. The Belt and Road Initiative operates the same way but faster. The loan looks generous. The project gets built. The country cannot repay. China does not demand austerity. It demands the asset. This is stage 4 perfected. No need to wait for 7 rounds of negotiation. Just take the port or the power plant or the telecom network. And because the original loan was denominated in dollars or euros, the debtor country has no way to print its way out. The currency trap and the debt trap work together. Now apply this to 2026. The USMCA review is not a meeting. It is a forcing function. The United States will demand changes. Mexico and Canada will resist. The US will threaten to let the agreement expire. Mexico and Canada will calculate the cost of losing access to the US market. They will fold, not because they are weak, because the dependency is structural. The review clause was designed to produce this outcome. The surprise is not that it is happening. The surprise is that anyone thought it would work differently.